Good afternoon and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story this hour. Europe is grappling with a second wave of COVID-19 infections. Now, governments are racing to impose tighter restrictions, but the question is it too late? Two of Europe's biggest capitals are currently in trouble, with Paris imposing overnight curfews and London considered banning people from meeting indoors to combat the spread of the virus. Now, the World Health Organization's European office has said that the rising surge in cases causes great concern.
The fall-winter surge continues to unfold in Europe with exponential increases in daily cases and matching percentage increases in daily deaths. The evolving epidemiological situation in Europe raises great concern.
London will enter a tighter COVID-19 lockdown from midnight on Friday as Prime Minister Boris Johnson seeks to tackle a swiftly accelerating second wave of coronavirus. But anger is slowly rising in the city over the economic, social and health costs of the biggest curtailment of freedoms in decades.
We must take firm and balanced decisions to keep this virus under control. This is the only way to protect lives and livelihoods, and we must act now. Delayed action means more deaths from COVID, it means more non-COVID deaths, and it means more economic pain later, because the virus comes down slower than it goes up. We should stop it going up in the first place. And unless we suppress the virus, we cannot return to the economy we've had. Unless we suppress the virus, we cannot keep non-COVID NHS services going. And unless we suppress the virus, we cannot keep the elderly and the vulnerable safe and secure.
In Spain, Health Minister has said that the coronavirus situation was very worrying, with coronavirus patients occupying 20% of hospitals' capacity in Madrid, since Spain exited a tough lockdown in June. The infection rate has soared, with daily cases exceeding 10,000 from late August. Hospitalizations are on the increase too, but the number of severe cases remains far lower than during the first wave. Now moving to Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that she and the leaders of Germany's 16 states have agreed on tougher measures. Limits will be imposed on the numbers of people at private events. If an area records more than 35 new infections per 100,000 people over 7 days, even more stringent caps will be enforced. If this number exceeds 50, Europe's biggest economy will also begin imposing mandatory mask wearing in crowded places. The Netherlands, which got away with some of Europe's laxest regulations, is also going into semi-lockdown, its strictest measures since March. All pubs and restaurants have been ordered shut, but unlike the first lockdown, schools and public transport will operate. The measures will last for 4 weeks, with a review scheduled after 2. The Netherlands has the highest per capita infection rate anywhere in the world, reporting a daily caseload record of over 7,000. To discuss the spiking coronavirus numbers and the upcoming EU summit, we are being joined by Stephen Beardley, correspondent with DW. Thanks for being with us. Now, Europe has overtaken the US and India in coronavirus figures. This is quite a significant surge in cases.
Yeah, there is a surge right now, and it's clear that it's pretty bad. Just to give you a sign of how serious things are, at the beginning of the summit, which started yesterday, Thursday, and is going on today, Friday, the president of the EU Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, within minutes of beginning and opening the summit, had to actually excuse herself and go into self-isolation because one of her staff members had contracted the virus. That's the second time in just a few weeks that she's actually had to self-isolate because the virus has been around her. She, of course, is in Brussels. That's one of the hot spots right now. Pretty much everything on the European map is red. You mentioned France, of course, probably one of the biggest worries in the continent right now. A record number of new infections yesterday, 30,000, more than 30,000 new cases. That's a record since the outbreak has begun, and it's not alone in terms of making records this time. Just yesterday, multiple countries, including Germany, Poland, even tiny Lithuania, setting new records for their case levels. As you also mentioned, what we're seeing is that death numbers have remained low, however, in comparison with the spring. So we are seeing a rapid spread right now, numbers spiking, but we're not seeing the same kind of intensity of the virus as we've seen before. So it remains to be seen exactly where things go.
Right, Stephen, to what extent is the EU coordinating a fight back? We have seen more stringent lockdowns in certain places.
Well, for the most part, lockdown measures are going to be led by the member nations instead of the EU. The EU has made some progress in agreeing on a metric for what makes an area high risk. That was something that they hadn't agreed on because everyone was using different metrics for when cases got really bad. So what they have agreed on is 50 cases per 100,000 residents over a 14-day period. That's allowed the EU to create a map showing high-risk areas and basically created a platform of agreement through which people can put in travel bans, things like that. What it does show right now is that pretty much the entire bloc is red, with the exception of maybe Finland, I believe, is the only green country. And then there are some other countries that are gray because they haven't really submitted their data yet. So as usual with the EU, sort of a clunky solution to a very pressing emergent problem. And that means that member states are really going to be the ones who put in the measures, as we've seen with France putting in a curfew that begins tomorrow. Very unpopular there. And then with Germany starting to explore some curfew options and basically setting up the potential for more restrictions in the days ahead if numbers don't go down. So we're seeing different nations doing different things. Brussels, I should mention, also installing not a curfew, but they actually closed cafes and restaurants for a month. So really starting to hit hard again.
Right. And what does this new wave of infections mean then for European economies that haven't even begun recovery from the first wave in spring?
No, it's definitely not good. And this is really the key problem facing European leaders right now. They know how much damage was done back in the spring through the generic all-purpose lockdowns that many installed, including Germany. The EU economy as a whole contracted about 11% in the second quarter. That's massive. Different nations had it worse. Some had it better, including Germany, for example, but they don't want to go through that again. And they're definitely getting an earful from business communities saying we don't want a generic lockdown and we'd prefer to avoid lockdowns in general. But of course, on the other side, they're hearing from epidemiologists who are really pounding that message through. Something has to be done now. This is urgent. We just heard from the WHO, as you mentioned, saying that something has to stop the chain of infection right now. Look at what France has done. Emmanuel Macron there not instituting a general lockdown, but naming several cities and locations where there would be a curfew beginning at 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's really problematic for a country where no one's really done with dinner by 9 p.m. So you can imagine how restaurants are upset by what it will do to their business. Uncertainty is really the problem here for a lot of businesses across the EU, as anywhere where there are lockdowns that are looming. So it remains to be seen how harsh these lockdowns are going to be and then what it will mean for the general economy. Right now, it doesn't look good. Even if the lockdowns aren't put into place, people are going to be hesitant to go out. Consumer confidence is actually really down in Europe compared to months past, compared to the summer where there was a bit of a lighter, I guess, sort of an atmosphere that it wasn't as bad as it is right now.
Absolutely. Stephen, thanks very much for joining us. All the latest coming out of Europe there.